So on our history lesson, we are now venturing in slave trade. Are we together?
Yes, sir.
Slave trade. What is slave trade? Slave trade, it is the buying and selling of human beings. Are we together?
Yes,
so
sir.
we are saying the European slaves were cunning across under the feudal system where slaves would be sold, bought, or exchanged for goods. So in this case, we are saying that as individuals were being bought or being sold, they were now being exchanged for goods. In traditional Zimbabwe, we have that we call napka, and this means captives. Slaves were being treated as captives. So origins of slave trade. What made slave trade to originate? The economies of European countries were complex, involving some cases long distance trade in a variety of items, which means these Europeans, they were coming either with cloth, either with beer or whatsoever to sell to Africa. So Africa, that's not static or isolated. Links with other parts of the world were developed, and these were based on equality. They were now having international leagues as individuals in Africa and Mandinga Empire, Zimbabwe, whatsoever. They were having international leagues. Okay. After that, this was a time when European traders came to Africa, not to look for traditional items or for trade items such as gold or cloth, but they started to come to Africa in order to look for individuals to sell or to buy. Altogether, for human point of view, the selling and buying of people was a violation of moral principles. Altogether,
yes,
from
sir.
an economic point of view, this trade in people saw the beginning of poverty, ignorance, and increased inequality among African people. Why? The Africans, they used to sell each other to the Europeans in order to earn something. So the demand of slaves, it became more proficient in Europe. Why? In Europe and America, the development of merchandise capitalism led to setting up of plantation and mines. So by the time when in Europe mines were now being opened, plantations were now being opened, they demand labor, that is intensive labor. Are we together? So the Europeans, as they demanded intensive labor, they start to come to Africa in order to buy individuals in which they used in their mines and their farms. Are we together? Also, feudal leaders used slaves for various functions. For domestic work, to cultivating of the fields. In domestic work, we can say that they use these people to wash their plates, to wash their blankets, to cook for them. Are we together? Like, after that, this early demand for slaves was very small indeed. The slave labor was required to work in European and Arab estates. After that, in Zambezi region, around Tete and modern Mozambique, slave labor was used by Portuguese settlers on their vast estates, that is in sugarcane plantation or other means. So, we are now venturing in a topic which says why Africans were enslaved. Why Africans, basically, they were enslaved. Africans were enslaved. Why? The reason is Asians were first raised to be used by Americans in plantation as slaves, but they died in large numbers. Are we together? Also, some writers argued that Africans were preferred because they were strong and could resist diseases. That's why Africans were slaves in their large numbers. They resist diseases. Number two, both these arguments are weak. A more convincing argument is that by the beginning of the 15th century, Europe had control over the seas through advancing of boat building and ship building altogether. So they take advantage of this ideology and they started to enslave Africans because they have large transportation system whereby they can pick up to 10,000 Africans and they enslave them to Europe in order to use them. Are we together? So Africans were enslaved. Why? Because these Europeans, they've got a method of transportation. Number two, it is because they resist the diseases, and above all, they can work for long hours without complaining. That's why they were enslaved. After that, we shall go to the topic whereby organization of trade, triangular trade, and its evaluations. Are we together?
Yes,
thank you very much.